My next guest is Dr. Anthony Birchwood, a former research fellow at the Caribbean Center for Money and Finance, CCMF. That is a policy research group established by the Central Bank of Caribbean Community Countries and the University of the West Indies to conduct, study, and provide information on monetary and financial policy issues in the region. My next guest now lectures at the University Department of Economics. He is Dr. Anthony Birchwood. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us, and good morning.
Good morning, and good morning to all your listeners.
It is good to have you here, very good to have you here. I am looking at the IMF report. I look at it for a number of different reasons. To understand everything to me is causation, so what caused in their view where we are now. But before we get to that, I want to deal with their description. They describe our economy as confronting a major shock, but because of a number of factors, a well-educated workforce, one of them, some remedial measures initiated by the government, and a stable political system, they say we are not in crisis. Explain.
Right. Well, essentially, the IMF is saying, look, there's a global financial crisis occurring, and particularly in our case, we face collapsing oil prices, rapid fall in oil prices. That is happening to all other oil-producing countries. Mm-hmm. So we are all in the same situation. Mm-hmm. What is important is how we handle this and how we handle our medium term to climb out of this crisis. So that is what the IMF was hinting at, that, look, they think the government is doing the right thing right now. They agree with the measures the government has taken, but they also say we need to make some hard decisions still.
From whence you came gives clarity as to where you're going. Cause and effect always assist in the learning curve. In that area, the IMF report singles out the size of energy revenue windfall that we experience and the fact that the country has undersaved, as they call it, and underinvested in the future. Right. Elaborate, please.
Yeah, because what is happening here is that at the time of plenty, and that is in June of 2008, mm-hmm. we were booming. Our prices had reached $144 a barrel. Mm-hmm. So we were very happy. Mm-hmm. It's at that point when we should have been thinking about the medium term and the long term and start putting measures for when the oil prices fall. And you know what? That was in 2008 when oil prices reached $144 a barrel.
Right.
And, by the end of 2008, oil prices started to collapse. And by 2009, there was a global depression because you had a subprime crisis that occurred in the United States. And because of that subprime crisis, many economies started to go into depression. It didn't hit us hard yet because we had a lot of savings still put aside. However, it's starting to bite us now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Your colleague, economist McGuire, says that we had 14 years of a good harvest that we will never revisit again. Are you in concurrence with that?
Well, I don't want to say I agree with him, but I have to agree with him. You see, what happened here is that oil production is falling too. So oil prices have fallen, but oil production is also falling. And so it's difficult for us to build that kind of boom and momentum we had back in 2008. And I should tell you this, in 2008, things were so good that we had a huge trade surplus with the United States. Mm. Because we had something like 8-1. In other words, 8 U.S. exports to Trinidad to 1 U.S. of imports from the United States. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we had a huge trade surplus with the United States, but that was back then.
Now there's a huge deficit.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So now we have a problem.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Anthony Birchwood is my guest this morning. We're talking about the IMF. Before I get into that, there is something that you point out. I'll get back to the IMF in just a second, but something that you pointed out back in 2014. You were looking at the size of the budget, and this year is the same because you said at the time of plenty, we were into $60 billion. At the time of deteriorating revenue, we are still at $60 billion. That is unsustainable. That gap that we inherited, that gap that was presented to the nation is something that may be coming up in the review. And you back then spoke in terms of a devaluation of the Trinidad and Tobago dollar.
That's right.
And
That's right.
what do you anticipate that will look like?
Well, the truth is, the government in power would not have wanted to shock the economy drastically just like that. And so because the budget prices before was in the $60 billion range, they did not want to come in this new budget, that is the budget last year when they just came in, and shock the economy by putting a budget drastically lower than what people were accustomed to, because then that will call for cutting all kinds of services. However, I think they have to rethink this, and so I suppose in the media review, they had to do some drastic cuts, and they have to make some very hard decisions as to what to cut. For example, we have the GATE program, that is basically giving free education to our citizens. The problem is that is a difficult program to sustain, especially in times where your oil revenue is falling.
Well, the Prime Minister did say that we are looking at means testing.
Well, that's a possibility. And I want to say this too, and you would have seen this in the IMF report that they just released. Well, not a report, a letter. And what they are saying in their report is even things like make work program.
Yes.
We may have to cut back on make work programs because it's difficult to sustain that when your revenues are declining.
There's a CPEP and URP government employment schemes, as they call it. They say that we have to take a hard look at that. The reason I ask you about, I moved away from the report just for a moment to deal with that question you raised about one budget that cannot be sustained with dwindling revenues, because there is the expectation of some degree of equalization that's mentioned in the report when they're saying that there is a possibility of further revenue coming in the area of improving tax collections, increasing gaming taxes, and reintroducing property taxation. All these things have been articulated by the government. My question is, will these initiatives be implemented in a timely manner, yielding meaningful results to impact us in the short term?
Well, you see, essentially, our expenditures were very high. The budgets, as you know, typical budget was over $60 billion, sorry. That was the typical budget for Trinidad and Tobago. And revenues were lower, so we were running deficit budgets. In other words, our physical expenditure was greater than our revenues.
Right.
Now, the challenge is, how would you bring revenue and expenditure back in line? It's not so easy to do this, because would you be cutting expenditure? And if you cut in expenditure, what you will cut out in the expenditure, given that people have a certain level of expectations in the economy and have a certain lifestyle they're accustomed to. And then you cannot just drastically raise revenue just like that either, especially since you're depending on oil revenues and oil production is falling, oil price falling. Then it's difficult to raise revenue too.
You are the economist, Dr. Anthony Birchwood, former research fellow at the Caribbean Center for Money and Finance, lecturer at the University of the West Indies. And in keeping with what you're saying there, that is the area that it confuses me, because the report says it's satisfied that there is further scope to widen the VAT base and increase some excise taxes, which are the lowest in the regions. That is given, fine, but there are going to be some attendant social dislocations when you do that. Are there not? And how do we deal with that? While on the one hand, you're trying to curb the deficits, to close the gap, as it were, and get yourself more revenue, but there's going to be a lot of dislocation happening on the employment line.
Yes, it's always a challenge, because, you see, even if we raise taxes and raise revenues from taxes, the reality is that we still have to be able to raise our purchasing power of goods outside. And it's always a challenge as to how to raise our purchasing power of goods outside. In other words, you need to improve your export earning capability. And therefore, you need to do things like diversify your economy to get other areas where you could earn foreign exchange. So that is always a challenge, and we can do it, but it would take some time to do that. Another thing I should mention is that the IMF report did mention that we had to be prepared to cut expenditure in certain areas in order and concentrate on productive investments.
Yes.
So we need to concentrate on productive investments. So in other words, we need to cut the frills in certain areas so that we could have productive investments. Now that is a challenge too, but it's something that we can do. We have to be prepared to sacrifice. And I am saying that one of the best ways is to build a medium-term industries, and that is the SMEs, small and business enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can do that, then these enterprises will grow enough that they could actually be valuable employers in the economy. In other words, our CPEP programs and all of that, we may not have to actually fight with that too long again, in the sense that we could actually get more productive investments from these micro enterprise industries.
You're going to deprive Forbes magazines of some side millionaires who cannot justify it. Anyway, our guest is Dr. Anthony Birchwood. You're inside Brunch. The mission welcomes the government's intention to push forward with adjustments in the financial system, but cautions some reform legislation has been lagging. They're also pushing for the passage of the long-delayed insurance legislation. Make clear to me the significance of this.
That's right. And I presented a paper just last year, and my paper was on pension funds. And specifically, I was on old age pensions.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is that we compel to pay old age pensions to our citizens when they reach that age. But the problem is that how do you actually gather enough revenue to pay these old age pensions, given that the population is growing and the pension demands will be there.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a point I was making. But besides that, right, your point about pensions, that's a very important, critical area of reform that we must undertake.
One of the suggestions made, of course, is that you can postpone the payment by these folks by lifting the retirement age. And two things you're doing there. Well, I guess it's which side of the coin you look at. On the one hand, you're keeping a certain expertise in the workforce. You're also suspending the actual payment of benefits. But at the same time, you're depriving young ones from getting jobs at the same time.
And the thing is, right, we need to do proper planning. So what happens, for example, with pensions, you need to do the age trajectory of the population and see what the demand for pensions would be, let's say 20 or 30 years from now. Other countries are doing that, developed countries. So they are looking to see what is the demand for pensions. And then they plan towards that by knowing that this will be the demand for pensions at that stage, and therefore we need to do X, Y, and Z as a result.
Precisely, based on that trajectory you're talking about is why the United States, they lifted it from 65 to 66. In the UK, I know it's moved up to 66. In the United States, what you do is you can continue to retire at the original 65, but you receive part of your pension at that point, and at 66, you get the entire thing.
And this comes as well because people are living longer. I mean, I hope I live longer too. but I mean, on average, people are living longer, right?
Yes, I understand that, and that's a good reason to do it. One of the areas that you'll have to give me some clarity here, is in the IMF report, they spoke of improving the supervision of credit unions. I did not understand that in the scheme of this. Please make clear.
Well, I mean, credit unions are valuable financial institutions. We had underestimated what credit unions actually bring to us.